You're dehumanizing the child right now.
I will be completely honest with you. If there is a child inside of my body, it is not its own thing, it is mine. That I can do what I want with it while it is still within my body.
All right, we're here with Riley, right? So Riley, you've seen our photos out here. What do you think of this display today?
I think that you guys should have, your freedom of speech, but I do think that having these images comparing it to genocide is just completely incorrect. And I also think that the fact that these photos are not from medical professionals and real life doctors is just kind of proving the point that this is more like fear mongering than anything else.
Okay.
And especially putting it outside one of the only female dorms on campus is not going to really help anything, and it's just going to make these poor girls feel uncomfortable to come outside of their buildings. So
just so you know, we do actually have papers verifying them that these photos actually came out of a doctor's office. They were smuggled out, and they are verifiable. Why would you say it's fear-mongering?
Because you're displaying abortion in a way that's just not actually true. I spoke to one of y'all's protesters earlier, and he even verified that these were not real. He verified that these images were not taken from doctor's office. He could not tell me where they were from. But also, given the fact that these are not even medically accurate photos, it's trying to paint abortion in a way that it's actually not. Abortion saves women's lives. It allows women to have good lives, and then it also helps women survive. So I think that it's important to understand that comparing this to something like the Holocaust, which killed 6 million Jews, it's not the same thing in any way, shape, or form.
How did the Nazi government convince people to be okay with killing the Jews?
I mean, you had Hitler, who was basically overtaking their country. So
what did he say about the Jews?
He believed that they were not superior to the average person, and he also agreed with the Aryan race, and he wanted an Aryan race. He wanted to cleanse the country of Jewish people.
He said they were less than human, right? Yeah. Okay. So what we're trying to show with these pictures is the humanity of the aborted baby. Because in all cases of genocide, you take the Holocaust, as we just talked about, and slavery here in the South. What was said about the slaves is that they were 2/3 of a human. They weren't fully human, or they were closer to the chimpanzee than they were to humanity. So they dehumanized them. And when you do that, you can suddenly treat them as less than human. So what we want to show through these pictures is the humanity of the baby in the womb. And that's why we call it genocide, because by saying those pictures aren't real, which they are real, I mean, you can not believe that if you want, but it's saying that's not really what it looks like. It's not really human. And when you say that, then you justify the violence that is done to them.
Well, if you look at the violence, if you're saying that it's violence done to unborn fetuses, I think it's also too important to understand that 75% of abortion are done within the first trimester, before there is even a heartbeat, before babies even have limbs, before there is any form of an actual human life. And if you're going to use the argument that conception starts at, or life begins at conception, then what do you believe that men should pay child support? Do you think that men should be able to pay child support the second that conception occurs?
I believe that men are responsible from the second of conception. Yes, I do agree with that. I mean, we would have to agree on when life begins, but I think we both would agree that if it is a life, it should be protected. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that, but I also want to ask you the question. If you're saying that life should be protected, how are you guys actively trying to help children that are getting killed by guns every single day? How are you actively trying to help children that are in the foster care system? How are you trying to help children that are in special education right now who can't even get proper services that they need that actually help them and protect their lives?
Yeah, well, I mean, I try to help everywhere that I can. As a Christian, I feel called to that. The most important people to protect, I think you would agree with this, are the ones that don't have a voice. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but I also think that this isn't how you are supposed to go about this, though.
How would you recommend?
I agree that you guys should be able to share your opinions. I completely agree with that, but I think that when you're saying giving the people that don't have a voice, at the time that these pictures are showing, 10 weeks, these babies do not have limbs. They do not have brains. They are not real people. And if you're going to say that, oh, well, life begins at conception, everything like that, then how are you going to sit there and say that life begins at conception if you have a 10-week-old abortion right there, or a 10-week-old fetus right there that you're showing? You think that could survive outside of the womb by itself?
Does survival matter to whether or not it's human? Does that, whether or not something is able to survive, does that make it less human?
No, but I think it's important to understand that if a woman understands that a pregnancy is not viable, why should she have to go through the trauma of delivering that unviable pregnancy?
Well, if a child dies in the womb, the woman still has to give birth to it.
But no woman should have to do that.
Should have to give birth?
Well, no. If you are a woman who wants to actively have a child and give birth, you should be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes down to abortion, abortion is not there just to be like, okay, I got pregnant because I had a one-night stand, I need to have an abortion because I was not being responsible. Adult actions lead to adult responsibilities. We all know that. We're all adults here, okay? But it's important to understand that when there's a woman who, if she, for example, is having an ectopic pregnancy, or she learns that her child cannot be viable outside of the womb, why should she have to go through the process and the trauma of delivering that child?
Well, two things. I would agree with you. In the case of the woman, when the mother's life is in jeopardy, we always are concerned with saving as much life as possible. But the fact is that even if something goes wrong with the pregnancy, the woman has to give birth, period. And that will be traumatic, period. And nobody can change that. Would you agree with that?
That's why there's abortion. If a woman necessarily does not have to give birth if she has an abortion when she learns that pregnancy is not viable. It's important.
Does she not have to pass what they call the clump of cells?
That would be more classified as a miscarriage than actually a birth.
My wife has had 3 miscarriages, and every time she's had to give birth to the miscarriage, and whatever, the one that was further along was harder because there were more hormones. There was a larger. For the sake of the argument, I'm going to say clump. There was a larger clump. She still had to give birth to it. She knew that the pregnancy was in trouble because she started bleeding, but that didn't mean that the baby had come out. So she still had to give birth. And when you take a pill or whatever, what it does is flushes it out. So it doesn't get rid of the fact that you have to give birth. It only, in my opinion, and I think this is just factual, it traumatizes the woman by killing first and then forcing her to give birth to a dead baby.
I mean, I'm going to use this as an argument then. Do you have a daughter?
I have 4.
You have 4 daughters? Mm-hmm. So if you were to have a daughter and God forbid she gets raped, mm-hmm. and she learns that she is pregnant because of this rape, do you think that she should be allowed to make the choice for herself and get rid of that child, or get rid of that fetus, or whatever it is at that stage in the time that she decides to get rid of it?
So I'll answer that by asking you this. If a child is conceived in rape, is that the child's fault?
No, it's not the child's fault, but I think it's also important to understand that at the end of the day, this entire argument of pro-life is not, it's pro-life when there's a woman involved. People just want to sit here and control women. It's not actually actively trying to save children or help children, because a lot of these lawmakers who are actively going against abortion and they want to punish women by abortion, they do not care about children, because they're the exact same politicians who are not trying to help gun violence. They're not trying to save the Department of Education, which provides funding and meals for students in schools. They are not actively trying to help the foster care system, and we all know for a fact that if they were to have a mistress, they would immediately get her an abortion. It's not actively trying to save children, it is actively trying to control women. That is all these people want to do. And the fact is, this is not the way to show it. This is not the way to show it whatsoever, because these are not actively trying to showcase what you're going for. This is just trying to showcase and make women feel bad at the fact that we are going to have to deal with it if we were to have an abortion. This is not going to help people feel anything about it. This is going to make people just feel bad, being like, oh, I saw these images, now I can't even sit there and feel like I can get an abortion because these people are comparing it to genocide.
I mean, I don't blame women for abortion. I think the men are the greater responsible party for abortion.
Yeah, thank God that you actually understand that. Majority of people do not understand that. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that it's 2025. My mother, when she was my age, she is 52 years old. I am 21 years old. When she was my age, the fact is, if she were to have gotten pregnant, she could have easily gone and gotten an abortion, because she had more rights than I do at this time in my life. And if you look at it, especially in South Carolina, we currently have a bill that is trying to go through our state legislature that is going to make abortion completely illegal. Not only that, but also punish women and make it homicide. And you can put women on the death penalty for that. Do you think that a woman who actively tries to get an abortion and tries to save herself, or even just make sure that she can survive and live her own life, do you think she should be charged with homicide?
Do you think I should be charged with homicide if I killed my 1-year-old?
Yes.
Okay. Well, if it's a human, it's homicide.
There's a difference between a human and a fetus. A human can survive outside of the womb. A fetus cannot survive outside of the womb.
So when does life begin?
Life does not begin at conception.
When does it begin?
To me, life begins when it has a heartbeat and it could actually survive outside of the womb.
When does it have a heartbeat?
If I'm not mistaken, it would be second trimester, I think. I think it's second trimester because it's usually around the time where they can figure out the gender of the baby.
Okay. So the moment there's a heartbeat, it would be murder.
I don't think that it's murder. For me, abortion will never be murder unless it's a situation where, let's say, you're in your 9th month pregnancy, you're about to have a baby and you decide, I want an abortion. I don't think that should be allowed. And I agree with y'all to that certain extent. I think that after a certain time, abortion should not be allowed. But I think that we should not have these limitations on abortion because majority of abortions happen within the first trimester. And most women don't even know they're pregnant until 6 weeks. So
they know enough to take the pill.
I mean, yeah, they usually find out at 6 weeks when they can take a pregnancy test and understand that they can, go get an abortion. But I think it's important to understand that, this is just a woman's choice. This should just be something involved between a woman and her doctor. This should not be something that the government controls. This should not be something that a bunch of men control. You're a man. You will never understand what it's like to be a woman living in this country where we are actively having our rights being fought against by our government.
What if my wife killed my child?
Well, then you can have an opinion on it, but the fact of the matter is...
Well, she has there's that possibility.
I mean, sure, yes, your wife could decide tomorrow she wants to kill your child, which I hope she doesn't, but it's a woman's choice.
So you said, though, that life begins with a heartbeat. Do you still stand by that?
I mean, to an extent. To me, life...
To an extent? I mean, it has to be either it is or it isn't.
Well, I believe that when a child can leave the womb and can actually survive on its own, that is a life.
Fierce independence is what makes you human?
Sure, to an extent.
Are you independent?
I mean, to an extent, yes.
Are you here on a scholarship?
Yes.
Do your parents help pay?
Yes.
So are you independent?
Not in that sense, but there's a difference. There's a difference between me being independent in the sense that of money standpoint and actually being able to live my life. I don't have to worry.
Does a person on oxygen, is that person less human because they need oxygen to live?
No.
Okay. So what does viability have to do with it?
Because at the end of the day, viability, it's important to understand that if a child is viable outside of the womb, then yes, it can survive and it can live on its own. Mm-hmm. But you're sitting here comparing...
I mean, a baby outside of the womb still needs to be nursed by his mother. He can't feed himself. He can't change his own diapers. Why is there a distinction between in the womb and out of the womb?
Because inside the womb, a child is actively growing and developing inside of it. When a child is outside of the womb, it's not growing inside of a womb and getting nutrients from what is it called? What's the tube? Why can't I think of the tube?
The umbilical cord?
Thank you. I don't know why I could not think of that word.
But he's still getting nutrients from his mother because the child's mother needs to eat well so she can nurse him.
Correct, but you also have to understand, though, is when a child is inside of the womb, it's actively developing. A child outside of the womb is actively developing as well, but it's not relying on its mother for oxygen. It's not relying on it for a heartbeat. It's not relying on it to have limbs. It's not relying on it to be able to walk.
I mean, aren't those arbitrary reasons to call something not human because it needs help?
No.
Okay. So this question still is like, when does it become human? Because, I mean, my children need me. I have a 15-year-old, I have a 14-year-old, I have a 3-year-old, I have a 7-year-old. They all need me in different ways. That doesn't make them less valuable or less human because they need me, does it?
No, but I think it's important to understand that your children have a heartbeat. Your children can breathe on their own. Your children can actively...
You said maybe in the second trimester the child will have a heartbeat.
Correct.
So is it human then?
Sure, if you want to say it's human.
So you would be against abortion in the second trimester?
I am against abortion when it becomes an issue of people using it as birth control. When people are actively sitting there and they are not taking the prior responsibilities of practicing safe sex and they are using abortion as birth control, because we have a ton of birth control options out there. But I also think it's important to look at it as our government in Project 2025 is actively trying to get rid of those options. So it's not a matter of saving children. These government officials and a lot of these people that agree with what you guys are showing do not actually care about children.
That's a large assumption. That's an assumption about me. I don't really think it's fair. Well, what do you think motivates me?
Because you think that children, these are children being actively murdered and genocided. But that's not what's occurring. A large majority of people do not actually have abortions. Abortion's not like this crazy thing that you think people are doing every single day.
It's millions.
I can tell you right now that there are not millions of people today getting abortions, considering the fact that a lot of states are actively going against abortion and are putting laws against women who could be able to get abortions. South Carolina is a perfect example.
Why do you think so many people are against it?
I think that some people are against it because they've been taught wrong, because they actively have been told the wrong information. And, you know, I agree that people can have their own opinions, and I can also have my own opinions, but I think a lot of people are against it is because they've been actively told incorrect things about abortion.
I mean, we agree with that. That's why we're out here with these pictures, because we're the only ones that are going to show you these pictures.
Yeah, these pictures that are not actively real, and you guys are comparing it to the Holocaust. Do you think, and I'm going to ask you this, so do you think that if, let's say I were to have an abortion tomorrow, do you think I'm as bad as Hitler?
You're not going to like this answer, but the answer is yes.
So you think that I, as a woman, as one singular person, if I were to have an abortion, I am just as bad as Hitler, who killed 6 million Jews and who actively put these people into concentration camps and were responsible for their murders?
Well, there are degrees of evil, but if I lied to you, what does that make me?
A liar, sure.
And if I kill somebody, what does that make me?
A murderer.
Okay, so Hitler killed people, he's a murderer. If you kill somebody, it makes you what?
A murderer?
Right, so if abortion is ending the life of a human being, it is technically murder.
It's not ending the life of a human being, it's ending the life of a clump of cells. And that doesn't even have a life, it's a clump of cells.
Well, for the sake of argument, if we could just assume that I was right for a second, that you were guilty of murder, do you know what you could do about that? How you could ever live with yourself, or how you could be healed from that?
I feel like that's between me and myself and my own conscience.
You know, what would you tell Hitler? Would you just shoot him on the spot? Or would you have any inkling of, like, desire for Hitler to change? If
I were to see Hitler today, in the age that we are in, I would want to ask why. Because he even had, his grandmother was Jewish, or his great-grandmother was Jewish. One of them was Jewish. And nobody sits there as a normal, sane human being and says, I'm going to kill 6 million people. But you cannot compare a woman to having an abortion to Hitler.
Well, like, killing is killing, right?
But my thought process of it, so you're saying if it's killing, so is a woman getting an abortion just as bad as Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy, who killed all of these men and who were serial killers and put their bodies into chambers with acid?
Yeah.
Do you think that's as bad as a woman getting an abortion to save her own life?
I mean, I don't really, it's not my place to decide who is worse than somebody else or better than somebody else, but just on an objective standpoint, killing is killing. Yeah, I think killing and eating people is like a much stronger degree of evil, right? But it doesn't make just killing any better, right?
When you say just killing, I think that takes away from the woman itself. Because I can tell you right now, no woman actively wants to have an abortion. There is no woman in the entire world who's like, oh yes, I want to get an abortion, so I'm going to get pregnant on purpose and have an abortion. No woman wants to do that.
Yeah.
That's why women use birth control. That's why women use condoms. That's why people actually take these steps to ensure they don't get pregnant. And people make mistakes. So do you think that one mistake that somebody makes, let's say they didn't use a condom one time, or they forgot to take a birth control pill, and that one mistake, do you think that one mistake makes this person some horrible, evil person that's just like Hitler?
I think that everybody struggles with evil. We all struggle with doing the right thing. I think that the reason that we're out here is because if you go to an abortion clinic, who gets paid?
Doctors.
Right, the ones doing the abortion, right?
Correct.
Okay, I guarantee you they're not going to show you these pictures.
No, because it's not real pictures. These pictures, I want to look at this for a second, because if you're actively going to talk about it and actively look at it, when you look at a 10-week-old abortion, you're telling me that there is a brain, there is actual limbs, there are hands, there are fingers. You're going to tell me that?
I mean, don't you see? I see a skull, I see eye sockets, I see a nose, I see hands and arms, I see intestines. Do you not see that?
Have you ever talked to a medical professional? Have you talked to an actual doctor?
Yes, of course I have.
Have you talked to an OBGYN? Have you talked to...
Yes, my wife has had 7 kids.
Perfect. So what doctor have you heard from that a child has a skull at 10 weeks old?
It has the forming of a skull.
So do you think that if it has the forming of a skull, it can survive on its own outside of the womb at 10 weeks old? You're telling
me
that...
that's an arbitrary reason to call it a human because of survival. Where does that come from? Does it make it less human because it has difficulty surviving?
No, but what I'm trying to understand is, if you're going to say, oh, it has the formings of a skull, oh, it has limbs, things like that. So you think that if a woman were to give birth to that, whatever that may be, you think that they could have birth. Why do you think that women are pregnant for 9 months? I'm just curious, why do you think a woman's pregnant for 9 months?
For the same reason that if you have a healthy life, you live to 80, 90 years old, because you develop slowly.
Exactly, you develop slowly. So why are you going to sit here and say that if you develop slowly, you're telling me that that is a human at 10 weeks old? Yeah,
because development begins somewhere, right? If you build a development, it begins by purchasing the property, clearing the trees. It begins somewhere. It's not a development yet until it's complete, but it is the beginning of a development. It will end in a development, right? But in a human, for humans, once the sperm and the egg come together, there's a transformation, just like the property being transferred into the new owner who's going to develop it. Only in the case of a human, the developer could change his mind about what he's going to build. Those two eggs, the egg and the sperm coming together, always ends up in a human.
So, do you know that a fetus at 6 weeks old is the size of a Tic Tac? It is barely the size of my pinky fingernail.
Uh-huh. So,
you think that that is a life?
Of course it is. Why is size relevant?
Yeah, it's a clump of cells. There's no actual life there.
So you're saying at 15 weeks or whatever, that's when life begins?
My skin is a clump of cells. Do you think that my skin is a life?
It's not a life on its own, but it's part of you.
Yeah, it's part of me, but it's not a life on its own. And if that clump of cells is not a life on its own...
You're not part of me. You're a unique individual, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So how did that happen? How come? I mean, you're alive, I'm alive, but we're not the same thing, are we?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Because we had two different parents.
Exactly. Because when an egg and a sperm come together, it creates an individual, does it not?
It creates a clump of cells that will turn into an individual.
When?
As it goes through a pregnancy and goes through trimester.
When does it become human?
It becomes human when it is viable, when you can actually... I will use myself as a perfect example. I was born at 27 and a half weeks. My mother was 27 and a half weeks pregnant with me and my twin sister. I was not supposed to survive. I had an 80% chance of dying. There was only a 20% chance of me living, but I could survive. I could survive outside of the womb like that. I was viable. I was able to survive.
That is a lot of help.
with a lot of help, but it was in the NICU. That still made me a life, though. I had a heartbeat, I could breathe. That still qualifies me as a life. I'm not trying to sit here and say that people should just go be having abortions in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to understand that the government and other people should have no control over what I'm doing with my body.
Should the government control whether or not people have slaves?
Yes.
Okay. So the government can say it's wrong for you to treat another human being that way.
There's a difference between a clump of cells and slavery.
Right. But you're using the same arguments that Hitler used to kill Jews by saying they're not really human.
So
You just called it a clump of cells.
I am not using the same exact arguments as Hitler. I can tell you that for a 100%.
Hitler dehumanized the Jews. You just dehumanized the baby by calling it a clump of cells.
Because it is. It is a clump of cells.
When does it cease? Because if you're going to end it, you have to have a clear answer. If you're going to tell a woman, you don't worry, it's just a clump of cells, or that's your baby. You don't really want to end the life of your baby.
Do you believe in the separation of church and state?
Yeah, I don't see how that's relevant.
Well, I'm going to ask this because it's important. Do you believe in the separation of church and state?
It really depends on what you mean by that. I don't believe that the church should be silenced by the state.
So do you believe that there should be a separation between women's bodies and the government?
If you're asking me if we should separate morality from the law, absolutely not. That's impossible.
How would you feel, and you're a man, so you will not know what this feels like, but how would you feel that if you woke up tomorrow morning and you were told by the government that there is a law that controls what you can and cannot do with your own body? How does that feel for you?
Well, we're not talking about that.
But I'm going to bring this up in an argument, because how are you going to sit here and say that, oh, it's killing babies, oh, it's doing this, it's doing that, but you have never experienced what it's like to be told what you can and cannot do with your own body. This is not an issue.
Well, that's not what you're being told. It is about children.
This is not an issue about children or morality. This is an issue about women.
So you're dehumanizing the child right now. You're calling that child your body, which it isn't.
Look, man, I will be completely honest with you. If there is a child inside of my body, and it is feeding off of my body, that is my body that it is coming out of. There is nothing, it is not its own thing, it is mine. And I should be able to make the decision that I can do what I want with it while it is still within my body. But I think it's important for you to understand that there is never in the entire history of our country been a law that decides what a man can and cannot do with his own body. This is not an issue of children, because I can tell you right now, you are actively not doing anything to help the foster care system, to help kids in Gaza right now who are being brutally murdered, who are actively unable to be with their families and are separated from them. You are doing nothing to help the gun violence in this country that are actually killing children. You're doing nothing to help that. So you coming out here and showing this is not going to help children. It's going to make women feel more and more bad about themselves, because women do not want to have to make this choice. It's not about saving children. It is about controlling women. That is all these people want to do. But I want you to understand that you as a man will never understand this.
Oh, I understand it very well. I understand that men love abortion. There's nothing like abortion to keep a woman in the playing field so that the man doesn't ever have to own up to his responsibility. Men push abortion.
You know what? And men should be pro-choice, because they're the ones that make women pregnant.
Well, there you go. That's why I'm here, because I defend women and children.
Do you think that men should be responsible to have vasectomies? Do you think that men should be forced to have vasectomies?
Of course not.
So then why do you believe that a woman should have to carry a child if she does not want to carry that child?
Because you just said it. It's a child. It's not your body.
You will never understand what it is like. I'm done here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your time.